All right. Great to see you guys. Happy New Year. One day I want to take a picture of who's still standing at the end of the minute, just to kind of and take a picture in the first 15 seconds to see what introverts have checked out already. I love it. I love watching room cooking. Thought first Sunday of the year we ought to review our mission statement because it's what we do. We just work year after year toward really what the Lord has called us to specifically at Radius, and all of it is backed up with a biblical precedent. So if you know how it goes, Radius Church exists to glorify God. So I thought particularly this morning, something that you could measure over the course of the year. When we do this again next year in 2025, assuming that we're back here in 2025, how's our worship? Are we worshiping? Like one in the room? Am I more engaged? Am I less engaged? How is it in my life? Are we glorifying God with our mouth, but with our life? And then it says that we're going to glorify God by making disciples, planting churches, and living generously. So making disciples, for those of y'all that haven't signed up, today is the day. On Wednesday night, the 10th, we're doing a discipleship training session. It'll be right here. We're inviting all the other Radius churches here. There's going to be a bunch of folks here. It's going to be a really fun night, but I need you to sign up because we're working on getting meals and stuff for folks, and we are a little low here at Radius Lexington. So if you haven't signed up and you're assuming it's at my campus, I can just show up. Well, you can just show up, but I prefer if you signed up on the way out, right? So just let somebody know or shoot us a text, put it on your card. We'll get you on the list. We are serious about that. If you're new to Radius, we really love this. We love gathering together like this. But in the end, our dream has always been that we as individuals, as a part of the whole, would learn how to make one disciple at a time. And so some of that training will go on tonight. I've heard folks that have known the Lord for a long time, like it's just super intimidating for me to think about that. Well, we'll deal with some of that on Wednesday night. It's going to be really good. I've seen the design, so it's going to be a great time to learn and be inspired to make a disciple. And then we say we're going to plant churches. There's a little red chair. Sorry, you're sitting right beside it, so you get pointed. It's a dangerous chair to sit in. I'm glad you didn't sit in it, right? We put a red chair in every one of the Radius churches, and it reminds us of where we started from. This room used to be full of red chairs, and so when we bought new chairs, we sent the red chairs to every campus, and we just put one in every room to remind ourselves, hey, our responsibility is to give folks away because we want to start other churches to bless other parts of town. Guess what happened this morning? Pillion's got a little mock run going on this morning. There's probably 40 or 50 people. Yeah. I'm proud of them. 6 folks from here, 3 families went with the Pillion group, and they're getting ready. Their official launch is in 2 weeks, so don't send them they're just practicing a little bit, trying to figure out how to set up chairs and everything, but that's what we do. We plant churches. And by the way, Radius Lexington, we're about due to plant again. So we need to fill up this room, and then in the new year, I'm really dreaming about planting toward the city from right here. But part of what has to happen is that we have to make one disciple at a time. Generally, just for a stat for you, if you don't know, there's about 900 people that come to Radius Lexington on a Sunday. I really believe that in the new year, by the time we get to 2025, there's about 1,100 or 1,200. We'd send a couple hundred down the road, which we've done in the past, and begin a new church plan. How does that happen? Well, we don't really put on a show here, so we're not inviting people to show. You're inviting people into your life and bringing them here. There's really only 2 ways to grow church. One is you can invite folks and invest them and take them up to Brothers and Beer after the meal and invest in their life, or you can have babies, right? So it's one or the other. I did my part. That's how it grows. And then we live generously. Next week, we'll give you an update on Give Hope. It's only open for a couple more weeks, so if you want to get in, we've had about 700 folks make a contribution to Give Hope. If you're new here, we pool our money at the end of the year so that we can give it to folks that are impoverished in our community. That's going really well. I'll give you the number next week. We have about 10 more days where it's open. So in 2 weeks, we're going to start a series through the book of Acts, which is kind of how we work. We work through books of the Bible, and we're going to call it Let's Go. If you watch a basketball, there you go, thank you. If you watch a basketball game this week, somebody's going to dunk the ball, and he's going to look at his team, he's going to say, let's go! go. I don't know why they can't come up with something else to say. But that's what everybody's been saying for a long time, and it's literally, it captures a lot of the thought in Acts, and it's going to be really fun to get to that point, and we'll talk about how we're going, and you'll hear stories of how Radius Lexington is going. But what we thought we'd do before we get into Acts is do a two-part series and call it Pause. Like this, like pause, stop, and delight. And then, let's go, right? Like it's really how when you watch the Bible, there's rest and then there's work. And there's rest and then there's work. And both are gifts, right? Like there's this lie that works against us. Well, it was cursed, but it was a gift in the original. And rest, there's this other lie, but we always got to talk about how fast we're going. We need to rest. So we will spend a little time on pause. Let me pray, and we'll jump right into it. Feel pretty underqualified on this one, Lord. You've convicted me a bunch on this subject in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So thank you for how you chase us and remind us of how you want things to go. I'm working on submitting to that, Lord, and I pray as I share what your word says, more important than my experience, Lord, pray that you teach us. Lord, we really do want to be faithful to you. We want to do it your way. We do want to take what you've given to us and give it to others. We do want to be an instrument in your hands and allow you to use us day to day, but we want to do it under your power, not our own. So we trust you, even in these few minutes, that you would move on us. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you came last Sunday, you had a unique experience. There wasn't nobody here, right? Because for about 10 years, we've taken the last Sunday of the year off. It's always interesting when we tell people that we take the last Sunday of the year off, you get this variety of responses. Folks that came Christmas Eve only are like, don't bother me, I won't be back till Easter, right? Like, so they're good. You got this other group of folks that will say about us from the outside, that's what I thought. It's that kind of church. I knew it was that kind of church. And then you got folks that are here 1.9 times a month, which is the national average. They're like, cool, that's another Sunday. Like, that don't count against me, right? Like, keeps my average right. You got some of us that are just grinders that it bugs a little bit. Like, we're getting soft around here. Like, I don't know. I put myself in that category just a little bit. So why? Why we take that last Sunday of the year off? Oh, really, real simple answer is it's good for us. I'll give you a couple of reasons. For me particularly, and for us as leaders who were here way back in the day when we started this thing, it helps us release control. That last Sunday kind of helps us release control and remind ourselves, no matter how hard we work, this is God's church. He does as he pleases with his church. It's his, it's not ours. It's interesting, folks have asked me about it that are pastors in the community. They ask about giving, like missing a Sunday of giving. I'm always like, bro, that's awkward. That's an awkward thing to say. This ain't a business. This is a body of believers. And so, like, that really never crossed our mind when we made that decision. Maybe it should have, but it just never crossed our mind because we really wanted to what? Release control and remind ourselves that this is God's church. I always get questions from folks inside, like, what if they go to another church and they like it better than ours? Like they're never coming back. Well, what I say? Like we're releasing control. God's doing his work in Lexington. He don't need Radius to do it, right? Like he's going to do his work. We're happy to be a part of it. And if they show up somewhere else and contribute, praise the Lord, right? This is his church. There's one church in Lexington. Since we started Radius, we like to be a prophet. We like to do stuff a little different. We like a little bit to get under people's skin and make them think. The fact that people ask questions about that Sunday is a good thing. We're having real conversations about what? About rest and who's in control. And I would be misleading you if I didn't just confess that I like sticking it to the legalists just a little bit. I like to do it whenever I get a chance. I like just stick it to them a little bit because they say stuff like, bro, we'll rest when we get to heaven. Like, yeah, you're going to get to heaven earlier because you ain't never rest, right? Like, Like, and then someone would say, well, the devil don't take a Sunday off. I'm like, is the devil your role model? Like who are you following? So the primary reason was to release control. Secondly, we really like it for our families. It's a different Sunday of the year where hopefully you adjusted on that Sunday. You had some great time with your family over the Christmas holidays. And hopefully there was this moment. If you missed it this year, don't miss it next year. There's a moment where that Christmas time together had a spiritual quality. It wasn't, being together as a family is not spiritual. Those who are lost and saved do that just the same. But did your family have a moment where it had some depth? Dads in the room, for years, I carried that. Now, that's pretty cool after developing a culture. On Thanksgiving, Cheryl reminded everybody, what are we thankful for? And led us all to pray around the table. At Christmas, one of my kids stepped up and he's like, hey, when are we going to pray? And he kind of led us in a little thing around our coffee table in our living room, which is really good. For me, those are my favorite times of the holiday season. So if you missed it, don't worry about it. Like next year, we're going to take last Sunday off, and you go, oh, yeah, this is about my family. It's good for us to be together, but it needs to have this little season of spiritual quality. Because when we started Radius, we were dreaming about you loving your first neighbors, the folks in your house, and leading them to God, not just doing it here. Thirdly, we love giving the volunteers Sunday off. We got some folks here that just work, and we love them for it. There's folks back there watching your kids right now that do it year in and year out, over and over and over. It's just a great Sunday to give the folks just one Sunday of the year off. I don't know if you know this, but the folks in Israel back in the day, they would have a year of Jubilee. So on the 50th year, 49 years, everything rolled pretty normal. And on the 50th year, they took the whole year off. It was a step of faith. It was this opportunity for them to rest and for their fields to rest and for everybody to rest. It really made this statement that they weren't in control, that God was. So that's why we do it. Anybody road trip over Christmas? Road trip? All right, furthest road trip? I got Austin, Texas. Anybody got me beat? Michigan. You got me beat. Yeah, Matt got me beat. Michigan, that's a worse trip, man. It's cold up there, man. I'm going to go ahead a lot. On the road trip, anybody hit Chick-fil-A? That's my favorite thing. I'm hunting. What's your worst Chick-fil-A travel experience? Anybody got off the exit, worked your way all the way to Chick-fil-A, and it was a mall? Anybody done that? Like that's a mall. I ain't going into the doggone. It depends on how bad you want some chicken nuggets, right? Like, am I going into the mall or not? And you're like, I'm not. I'm going to have to go to Zaxby's. No offense, Zaxby's employees. But anyway, but my worst Chick-fil-A experience, because I should know better, and I've probably done it 20 times, is when I'm traveling on a Sunday. I pull into a Chick-fil-A, and I'm like, where is everybody? And right there at the bottom of the sign says, not open on Sundays. What you think about that? I love it that Chick-fil-A does that until I want a Chick-fil-A sandwich, right? I got on the Chick-fil-A website, and they quote the original Mr. Cathy, and here's what they say. Truett saw the importance, that's not actually a quote, it's just a statement. Truett saw the importance of closing on Sundays so that he and his employees could set aside a day of rest, enjoy time with their families and loved ones, or worship if they choose. It's a pretty cool statement by a company that has exploded and went from just tiny in the 40s to nationwide. And he still today, and there's a debate if you watch the news at all about them being open on Sundays in one particular state. It was his conviction that if we take a day off, we could recharge. And if you read the story, he actually had worked 24/7 in the fast food world before opening his first Chick-fil-A. He just thought, I'm not going to do it. I got one day off, and I want my employees, and really saying I want them to rest and to recharge. And so before we preach on let's go, I really want to take a minute and have us all pause. And let's talk about the biblical history of rest. This week, I want to look at one particular issue. I want to talk about one day of the week. And next week, we'll talk about 6 days of the week. It'll get really practical. And hopefully, if you need it, and most of us do, it'll bring some rest to your life in this world where everything is just moving so fast. By the way, I went to breakfast. I always go to breakfast early on Sunday. I left my phone in the car by accident, and it just struck me. I'm 56. For the first half of my life, when I ate, I didn't have a distraction with me. It was just me in the restaurant. What if somebody needed me? Right? They got to call Lizard's ticket. They got to know where I'm at. They're going to have to wait. It's going to have to figure out. But this world that we live in now is so different than it was 28 years ago. Like in the pressure and the speed and the pace needs to have a group of people that know how to pause, how to get some rest in the middle of the pace. So we'll talk about a lot of that next week, but let me just take you through the history of rest in the Bible. Let's start with Jesus. That seems like a good place to go. Start with, what does Jesus say about rest? He says a lot about rest. He demonstrates, as Chris said just a minute ago, how to rest. So we'll start in the middle where Jesus speaks, and we'll go back all the way to Genesis, and then we'll come back to Jesus, and we'll go forward all the way to the end of the New Testament, if you can track with me. So this is Mark chapter 2. In Mark chapter 2, there's this pretty interesting scene. Jesus is walking with his disciples, guys that follow him, and it's on a day they call the Sabbath. If that's new to you, it was Saturday. It started Friday at sundown and went to Saturday at sundown. And the Jewish folks, that was the day of worship, and that was the day where they did not work. And they're walking, enjoying themselves, which seems like what the Sabbath would be about. And some of the disciples reached over, and they grabbed the top of some grain, and I imagine them just doing it in their hands like sunflower seeds, popping in their mouth and maybe spit it out because it seems nasty to me. But anyway, I need sugar on that kind of stuff. But anyway, like popping in his mouth, and they're just chewing it, and they're talking and hanging out. And all of a sudden, the religious folks see them doing that. You know what they accuse them of doing? Harvesting. I love it. Like I'm chewing on a piece of grain, and you're going to call it harvesting. That's why I like sticking it to the legalists, right? Because that stuff's crazy. And so they start fussing at him, and Jesus gets in the mix. You love it when Jesus is in an argument because you know who's going to win. And he leads with a little Old Testament history for them just to keep them in their place. And then he has this amazing 2 verses that I just want us to spend a little bit of time on. Let me just explain to you the times. What was happening is the folks in Israel, over the course of many years, hundreds and hundreds of years, kept on adding to the law. And so one rabbi might take the teachings about the Sabbath and say, you can't work on the Sabbath, so you can't drive past Greenville. Like if you want to go to Greenville on Saturday, you can go to Greenville, come back, but you can't go past Greenville. And then the next rabbi, and this is kind of how it happens when it's competition, you're competing against one, he goes, no, you can't go to Greenville. You can go to Newberry, but you can't go past Newberry. And then another rabbi who wanted to show that he wasn't soft, right? Like he go, you can't cross the dam, right? You can't cross the dam. You cross the dam, you're in sin. And it just kept on growing like that. It's just out of control. And so when these Pharisees call like messing with a little piece of grain harvesting, Jesus got to be shaking his head, maybe chuckling, maybe mumbling some anger out of his mouth without sin, right? Unlike the rest of us, but this is ridiculous. And then he says this, and it's pretty amazing. Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So he says, maybe to a little bit oversimplify, it was a gift. We gave you a gift. God the Father gave you this great gift of a day of rest. You know the history, right? When the people of Israel got the law, they had just come out of slavery. There weren't no Sundays. There weren't no days off. There was no Saturdays. There was no days off. They had worked and worked and worked without pay. It was the ultimate abuse of work. And he gave them this gift of a day off and built it into the calendar and gave them this rhythm of rest and gave them this whole 24 hours where they could really relax in some ways and change their thinking and focus on him specifically. It was this gift that he gave to them. It's really interesting how we, sometimes the church, just take something that's a gift and we make it work. Isn't that interesting that they took the day of rest and they made it work? You had to study hard to figure out what you can and can't do. Can I cut my grass on the Sabbath or not? Anybody grow up old as me that remember what you were a little nervous to cut the grass on Sunday because the neighbor might go to church and wonder what you think and be like, hey, I cut the grass, but I didn't trim and blow. That's what my rabbi said, right? Like I just cut the grass. Confusing as heck. And it makes this day that's supposed to be precious and good for us, just makes it hard. It's interesting when the government gets involved, right? If you grew up in the South, we had blue laws. Go to Walmart, they have these things out, and you can only buy groceries and only certain types of groceries. Like they have it, some of y'all not from the South, yeah, we look crazy down here. Like our government actually took what the church was saying, and this never works out good, by the way. When the government like tries to represent us, we ought to be able to represent ourselves, right? Like people, can I go on the side a little bit? People always talk about how schools fell apart when we stopped praying in schools. I always want to go, when was it a good thing for lost people to be praying? Like, the question is, are Christians praying? Are we training our kids to pray? Ain't nobody told us we can't pray in schools. Our kids got to know how to pray. Anyway, that had nothing to do with this. I'm just annoyed with it. Like, it's never a good thing. When the government's trying to do our job, we got to do our job. All right, let me move on. Here we go. This really set the people of Israel apart. So it's interesting what it did in a world where people were busting it all the time, particularly in an agrarian culture, a farming culture. It made no sense to take a day off. We're going to lose if we take a day off. And yet these folks, by God's leadership, began to take a day off, but then they abused it. And Jesus is like, this was a gift to y'all. Let me just back you up to Exodus, where God first gave this law about the Sabbath, and maybe it'll bring a little bit of clarity. This is the 10 Commandments. For some of y'all that are into politics, all you know about 10 Commandments is there's one in Alabama, right? That's all you know. You don't know what 10 Commandments are, but you know it shouldn't have been took out of that school in Alabama, which is hilarious. Anybody know the 10 Commandments? I saw this done by a dude named Joby. He's in Jacksonville. He learned it from a little kid. He says, so I'm going to teach you the 10 Commandments real quick. This was amazing. I hadn't heard this. I'm 56. I'm just learning. One God. All right, so there's your one. 2, make some scissors, and we're going to cut out all the idols. So have no idols before you. You track with me? There's 10 Commandments. One God. Y'all want to do them with me? I can tell all the men want to do this with me, right? Like, you can do them with me. You want to cut out all the idols. 3 kind of makes a W, if you will. Word. Do not use the name of the Lord your God in vain, so don't use your words poorly. 4, how many Sundays in a month? 4. About 4 usually, so 4. This is the Sabbath day command, which we'll get back to in just a minute. 5, what is it? Anybody know? Yeah, honor your father and mother, so little yes, sir. Y'all got that? All right, no, I'm just, little yes, sir, off the 5. 6, anybody remember what 6 is? Shout not murder. Boom. Yeah, murder. See that? Hey, I like that. That's my favorite. That's my favorite one. 7. Anybody know what this one is? It's adultery. It's a little sketchy to even have a hand motion for this, but like let's just put it in and hide back here somewhere. All right, like so that's adultery. You explain that to the kids later. I'll let y'all do that. Let's see. I lost my pinky. Anybody can tell I lost my pinky? So what is it? In some countries, if you steal, they cut your pinky off. All right, so that's 8. And I lied. I still got my pinky. Number 9. That's how not lie. Number 5. Don't covet. Don't take all everybody's stuff. I thought it was amazing. Little kid talked that in Sunday school. You got them? That's all 10. What struck me as I was getting ready for this, and it really moved me, is that number 4 is like a hinge commandment. It takes loving God and it connects it to loving your neighbor. And guess what's right there in the middle? Rest. Super convicting for me this week. Really the last 3 or 4 weeks as we started thinking about teaching this. That rest actually empowers my love. And as I review my own life, it's frustrating to me that I have wasted some of my life not loving because I was unwilling to rest. And I'm not talking about this 24-hour period of time. I'm talking about something way bigger than that. Just I like to go hard, and there's something about me that's ashamed of being soft ever, and I have all that in me. And then it just struck me that there's seasons where I just go hard and go hard and go hard and go hard, and I don't love anybody. I get a lot of things done. People might think I'm loving them, but I don't have the internal fortitude to show my love. It's frustrating as I looked at it. Been super good for me. Really came under deep conviction reading a guy who wrote a book on this subject, that I must have energy to love. And if that means whatever, I need to figure that out. I need to figure the rhythm out where I have energy to love. I'll read you this commandment that God gives us out of the 10 Commandments. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and your daughters, your male and your female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. So it takes pretty much everybody. You got some visitors over, they're not working. The folks that serve you aren't working. The animals aren't working. It's just an absolute day of rest, a day where you proclaim your faith in the living God, and the calendar is going to hold you accountable for it. I read one author say that his 6 days of work in creation, actually, you're celebrating the work that God did in the original, so that you're alive and well today. He provided for you. That was pretty good. And so the writer, Moses, as he writes the 10 Commandments, then he kind of goes back himself from this law that's being put in place for the folks of Israel. He says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. Was God tired? No. All he did was talk. Right? God doesn't get tired. He rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. So he points us back to creation, which I think is pretty important in this deal. So one of the things I love about the Exodus passage, it starts with remember to observe. So it seems like it's something that's already in their system, but they were in slavery, so they had no opportunity to rest on the last day of the week. And so he's reminding me, hey, do this. It's a law in Exodus 20, but he's also pointing it back to the original, to creation. And it was the last day of the week. And God, in this passage, he looks back on all the work that he's done by speaking everything into existence. And he stops, as we read, and he delights. He stops and delights in his work. So what's he doing? He's celebrating the 6 days previous. You ever do that? I don't know if you're like me or if I'm just weird, but I get to the end of one hill, I want to get on the next hill. Let's go. Let's get to the next hill. Instead of stopping and delighting in what's been done, God stops and he delights, says this passage. Now, let's be really clear that they worked 6 days. So for my older folks in the room, you're worried that the millennials are going to take another day of the week off. I know how y'all are. I know. You're like, if the Americans didn't work hard, then we'd all be speaking German or something like that. Y'all got all these sayings that y'all have. Y'all are worried, and that's true. Work was a gift too. When you take it back to creation, work was given to men and women as this gift. And then the seventh day you rested. It was this gift that we were given to take care of all the stuff that he had created and be responsible for it and hold it in line. It's a gift to get to work. 6 days, that's a lot of hours work. Matter of fact, some of us may need to work some more, so we'll be tired enough to need a rest at the end of the week. One of my boys, a brick mason, hired him, and he had hired some Christian kids in the past, particularly from a particular little Bible college, and he was hiring my son, and he's really worried about it. And so he came and he talked to me because he knew I was a pastor. And his assumption was, Christian kids just don't work hard. I'm straight with you. That's a shame. That's a horrible representation of Jesus. So the cool part was it was a brick masons, and they built houses, and my kids can catch and throw. So, like, he loved my kid because he could catch bricks and throw bricks. And so it worked out great. But here's the reality. Young people in the room, and those of us that are older, like in this community, we ought to be the best employees in this community. Amen. Because we know how to work. But we ought to know how to work because we know how to pause. Because we know how to rest. And so we have this energy for that work. They go hand in hand. That we work hard, but we also know how to recharge and reset and have this rhythm about us that keeps us healthy. Todd Carnes and I are the two pastors that have been here at Radius over the course of its time. Todd and I have lunch almost every Friday. This week, he's on this recharging thing where he does these ice baths. Anybody tried the ice bath? Anybody read much about this? Like, it's crazy. Have you done it? Go ahead. All right, yeah. So he told me that his wife, Carrie, had done it, and at that point, like, I'm doing it. I'm still in middle school a little bit. Like, somebody says they do it, double dog dare me, I'm in. I got to do it. So what Todd does, he's done it 10 days in a row. He jumps in his pool, and he plays this song that's 4 minutes. He's got to stay in for 4 minutes up to his neck. It's supposed to be good for your joints, and there's a lot. I mean, he gave me all the science to it. So he double dog dared me. I did my workout, and I went out and jumped in the pool. Let me just tell you. It was cold. It was Friday. I jumped in and dropped down like this, and my first reaction was, I need to swim. So I started pulling myself across the pool like this with my legs like this, pulling myself across the pool. I made 4 laps, and then I could kind of rest just for a second. My first 15 seconds, I had a few words to say about Todd Carnes, but I don't tell it. And then I got out of the pool. You talk about transformative. Like, when I put that towel on my skin, it felt like it was going to rub my skin off. It took me 24 hours to feel my feet again, right? Like, I ain't never doing that again. But in this deep, like, effort as human beings to squeak another day out of life, to last a little bit longer, to be a little bit healthier, we're all asking these questions, how to recharge. And those of us that know Jesus, certainly the physical is important. But we have these great spiritual answers, and I really want to point you to them. Next week, I'd like to be much more practical, so come back next week, and we'll have a little fun talking about what drains you and what fills you. I was thinking about what drains me, like if I'm this big cistern, and what fills me. One of the things that fills me is driving. I like to drive. I know that's weird. But if I go on a long trip, I drove to Austin over the Christmas holidays. I felt great when I got there. I don't know why. It just does, right? You can't have an opinion on it. That fills me. I'll tell you what else fills me is a happy Cheryl Reeves. That fills me. And when Cheryl's happy, I come in the house, she's bounced, like I'm hearing the stories. It fills me up, right? And on the other side, like what drains from you? What takes from you? It's interesting. This is something I love to do, preach, but it takes from me. Like this afternoon, really, my staff, they make fun of me because, like, nobody wants to see me on Monday because I'm grumpy. I'm like, for some reason, it empties me and it takes me Monday to fill back up, right? What else drains you? And unhappy Cheryl Reeves drains me, right? Like when Cheryl's unhappy, like, so I need to know what fills her up. So part of my job is build a fire in the morning because she's really happy if I build a fire in the morning. Like it goes back and forth, and in community, we fill each other. We work to fill each other, but as believers, that all starts with Jesus. To truly be full, we have to have time with Jesus. And so Jesus says in Mark chapter 2, the very last verse, he makes this shocking statement for those listening, and to you and I, it ought to make us worship this morning. He says, so the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. So he explains what the Sabbath was, that it was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. It was supposed to be this gift. But in the end, he says, the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. I actually fulfill the Sabbath. I bring rest. In some ways, he's saying, I am rest. What's he say in other passages? Come unto me, all you are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He's the author of rest. He offers it, and he's offering it this morning. He wants to give you rest. Again, we'll get to some of the practical next week, but I don't want you to miss that Jesus is offering you this thing that our world cannot find: peace and rest. So he says this, and then the book of Acts comes. If you're going forward, we went backwards all the way to Genesis. You come to Acts, and the church, fairly quickly, by the end of Acts, the church of Jesus Christ, is meeting on Sundays. They meet on Sunday after work. Sunday's the first day of the week. They meet after work, and they gather together, and they do this. They have bread and juice. They remember what Jesus did. They look back to the cross, but they look forward to the next week. It's interesting. Old Testament looks back. Sabbath looks back. New Testament on Sundays, they start looking forward. Start looking forward based on the work of Christ and let's go. We got work to do this week, but let's stop and rest and remember his work. And over the course of history, Sunday kind of became the thing. Let me just warn you. Do not make Sunday the Sabbath. You just got no biblical basis for it. It actually shows a little ignorance, quite honestly. Like, Sunday is not the Sabbath. Now, if you choose to take Sunday to rest, just call it rest. Don't tie it to the Hebrew Friday night to Saturday night. Like you just don't have that evidence based on the Bible. But the early church certainly picked Sunday. It was probably one of y'all organized folks decided Sunday's the day. I'll be straight with you. If you choose Monday, I'll be comfortable. If you want to take Monday and rest, for some of us that Sunday's a big day, that's a great plan. You can pick a day. You don't have to pick a day. It doesn't demand that you take a day. It does demand, and not only demand, but it seems to indicate that you would want to rest in Jesus. And it would be your ultimate rest. Both by design, because you have this hole inside of you, and you need the deepest type of rest. And for those of y'all that are believers, because you know him, why wouldn't you want to be with him? By the way, the fact that we meet on Sundays is this great argument for the resurrection. You talk about something for thousands of years. The Jewish folks met on Saturday. They went to the temple on Saturday. They had this day of rest, and then Jesus rose from the grave, and the church like it just moved the calendar. It's this great apologetic. It argues that Jesus truly rose from the grave. I don't have time to really talk about that, but let me say something really clear. Rest is what we're going for. If you hear Sabbath today and you think law, you're missing it. It's a principle. The principle, going back to creation, is that we work and then we rest. We work and then we rest. Work comes from rest. Rest comes from work. When you end of the week, you ought to be tired. When you get rested, you ought to want to work. They're both gifts. So this is one passage I'll quit with, and we'll read it. And then we'll take the Lord's Supper. This is in Hebrews chapter 4. I've read it before. It just never hit me like it has as I've been convicted about my own rest. I'm going to read the last verse, which won't be on the screen, and then we'll start in chapter 4. This is what the Hebrew writer says. He's writing to folks who are Hebrews, so they know all about the Sabbath. And here's what he says. So we see that because of their unbelief, talking about the old Hebrew folks, talking about the Old Testament history, they were not able to enter his rest. It's really interesting if you've read the Bible a lot and you think about the Jewish people and them being the people of God. In the news, there's all kind of conversation about it. But like most of the Bible, they're godless people. They're opposed to God. And right now, the Jewish folks are denying the Messiah. Like they do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, with some exceptions. The Christians. And he's saying about the Jewish folks, you denied the Messiah. In the Old Testament, you were unwilling to rest when God told you to rest. So it's a heavy passage. So we see that because of their unbelief, they were not able to enter their rest. They could not go into the promised land. We say R.I.P., rest in peace when somebody dies. You can only rest in peace if you know Jesus. There is no peace after death for those who have yet to meet Jesus. That's why if you're new here and maybe you don't know whether you know Jesus or not, we're desperate for you to know Jesus because we want rest for you here. He's given many of us rest. But we particularly are excited about that rest that will be eternal. And then he says this in chapter 4. God's promise of entering his rest still stands. So we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. For this good news that God has prepared this rest has been announced to us just as it was to them, just as they heard about it. But it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God. This was heavy to me. For only we who believe can enter his rest. So, like, we don't sit in this room as elite folks in this world. But because of his work, we should be a group of people that have rest. If you've believed, there should be this deep rest that's inside of you, and sometimes it gets away from you. But man, today when you come take bread and juice, celebrate that. Celebrate the fact that, as I've been stewing on this passage, a little overwhelmed at times, how different my life would be without Jesus. And what I take for granted, I believe in Jesus as a kid, I have this internal rest. Even when I get anxious at the core, I know that he's in control and that he loves me. And we want that. We want that for everybody in this town, which is why we're going to rest for a little bit and then let's go, right? Like, because folks need to have that rest. I've got more to read. If you got time, read this passage. It is loaded. I'll just read you the last couple verses, 9, 10, and 11, and then we'll take the Lord's table. So there's a special rest still waiting for the people of God. I love that. So me and you, I'm thankful for this rest that I've had since I met Jesus, but I'm looking forward to ultimate rest. R.I.P. Like, one day I'm going to really rest in peace. Back in the day, they actually called the Christians, when they talked, when one of them died, they'd say that, what? They were asleep. They were resting in peace. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. Last line, but if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. So as you come take bread and juice and we sing these couple songs, the idea of us being together on a Sunday is for this to refresh you. Like, perhaps you've had a really disappointing week, and perhaps you crashed and burned in some way, and this feels a little bit like that ice bath that I jumped into. Like when you hear the truth, it kind of shocks the system, and you feel it, but you know that there's something right going on inside. And even when you walk out the door, that towel might feel a little weird. Sometimes that's how it feels when you're convicted. For those of us that have been believing and walking with the Lord for a long, long time, man, today shouldn't just be this thing that we do, this habit that we're in. It's got value as a discipline, but it ought to be a place to be refreshed. So slow down as we sing these songs. Read the words. If you can sing the words. Even if you can't, we're cool with it. Sing them loud if you want. Like, ask yourself, why can I not engage? If engaging is difficult for you to sing or to even put your hands out or stand up, like if that stuff's difficult, just ask yourself and wrestle with it. Because we really want Sundays to be a time we come together and rest, but rest in Jesus. So when you walk up here and take bread and juice, this is an absolute celebration. Because of that work, you can rest. Because when I come up and celebrate the work of Christ on the cross, he declares me as righteous. I don't know about you, but sin stresses me out because I know I'm hurting somebody, I'm destroying something, I'm disappointing him, and then I come back and take this and it reminds me, despite who I am, that he made me righteous. So come up there and take that thing and rest in it. Let's do it together. Jesus, thank you for being the Lord of the Sabbath. We worship you for it. All the way back to Adam, Lord, rest has been hard for us. Work dominates our minds. Stuff and distractions for some reason or another, Lord, we pick them up so easy. Many of us know you, and we know that there's rest when we're with you, and Lord, we do want to set a precedent for this new year to be rested in you. I don't know exactly what message you want to land on each individual, but pray, Holy Spirit, even as we sing these songs, that you'd land it, that you would challenge and correct as necessary, encourage as necessary. And even as we slow down for a minute, Lord, meet us, even as we attempt to get our minds to worship you. Meet us in the middle of that attempt and show us yourself. As we take that bread and juice, Lord, help our minds go to the cross and celebrate that awful day for you, but wonderful day for us. We worship you, Jesus. Amen.